If you're busy, you should probably scroll away. If you want to enjoy the story to the end, clear your busy schedule. Let's get straight into it. The heat hung heavy in the air, the kind that clings to your skin, making the world feel slower, thicker. It was the kind of day where tempers ran just as hot as the pavement, and in a small southern town where strangers weren't welcomed, Dante Carter was about to step into the fire. He rolled in slow, the hum of his black SUV cutting through the quiet afternoon. The engine purred. The tires crunched over the gravel of a rundown gas station. A quick stop, nothing more. Just another town, another road, another mile between him and his past. But this town? It had other plans. He stepped out tall, broad, his frame cut from the kind of discipline only the military could forge. Dog tags glinted under the sun, a quiet reminder of the battles he'd fought, the ones he left behind. But the real battle? That was just ahead. Two sets of eyes locked onto him the second he exited his car. Leaning against their squad car, two deputies watched with a kind of interest that wasn't friendly. Not curiosity, not concern, just cold suspicion. One nudged the other, smirking. "Look at this guy," thinking he owns the place. Dante felt it before he even heard it. The unspoken weight of judgment. Wrong town, wrong skin, wrong assumptions. But he'd seen it before, lived it before, and he wasn't about to bow now. He walked into the gas station, grabbed a bottle of water, paid in cash. Simple, quick, no trouble. But when he stepped back outside, the deputies hadn't moved. They were waiting. The taller one straightened, pushed off the car, boots scuffing against gravel. A slow, deliberate approach. The other followed, a predator's grin stretching across his face. Dante exhaled, slow and steady. "Here we go." License and registration. The taller one barked before Dante even reached his car. Dante raised an eyebrow. No greeting, no explanation, just straight to business. He met the deputy's stare unflinching. "What's the problem, officer?" The deputy's smirk widened. "Your car looks a little out of place." Dante's jaw tightened. "Ah, there it is." The other deputy stepped closer, circling slightly. "Mind telling us what you're doing in town?" Dante rolled his shoulders back, the sun burning against his skin. "Just passing through." "That a crime?" The taller cop chuckled, shaking his head. "Depends." His fingers tapped lazily against his holster. "You carrying anything we should know about?" And just like that, the temperature wasn't just from the sun anymore. The game had begun. And just like that, Dante Carter found himself in the middle of something he never asked for. But what these deputies didn't know was that they had just picked the wrong man to mess with. What happens next? Oh, you'll want to see this. But before we continue, what would you do in Dante's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love gripping stories like this, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, the real fun is just getting started. Stay tuned, because this story, it's only beginning. The sun hung high over the small southern town, burning down on cracked asphalt and faded storefronts. The air was thick, heavy with heat and something else. Suspicion. Dante Carter had just finished pumping gas, ready to hit the road. But as he moved toward his SUV, he felt it. The eyes watching him, staring, judging, weighing him like a man on trial, accused of a crime he never committed. Two white deputies, leaning against their patrol car, their gazes locked onto him like vultures eyeing fresh prey. One of them nudged the other, smirking. "Look at this guy," thinking he owns the place. But don't. He'd been in worse situations, in war zones, behind enemy lines. He wasn't about to let two small-town officers rattle him. He exhaled slowly. Just another day. Boots on pavement. Heavy, deliberate steps. The sound of authority and trouble. Dante turned just as the deputies closed in, blocking his way. Hands resting on their belts, puffing their chests like roosters in a barnyard. License and registration. The word snapped out like a whip. Dante raised an eyebrow. No hello. No reason. Straight to business. He glanced at them, his military instincts kicking in. This wasn't a routine check. This was a challenge. What's the problem, officer? His voice was calm, controlled. The taller deputy, his badge glinting in the sun, tilted his head, studying Dante like an animal at the zoo. Your car looks a little out of place. He dragged out the last words, letting them sit heavy between them. Dante held his gaze. That's so. Yeah, the second officer chimed in. Mind telling us what you're doing in town? And there it was, the unspoken accusation, the real reason behind the stop. Dante could read it all over their faces. This wasn't about his car. It was about him. But Dante had played this game before, and he wasn't about to give them the reaction they wanted. He reached for his wallet, slow and steady, pulling out his ID, just passing through. That a crime? The first deputy snatched it from his hand, scanning it with narrowed eyes. A pause, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. Then, just as quick, it was gone. Depends, he muttered, flipping the ID back. You carrying anything we should know about? Dante exhaled slowly. He knew the drill. He'd seen it too many times. Push just hard enough. Try to make him crack. Give them a reason to escalate. But he wasn't biting. Not today. Nothing illegal, he said, voice even. Unless you count my coffee. The second deputy didn't laugh. He stepped closer, invading Dante's space. Smart mouth, huh? Dante clenched his jaw, every instinct in his body telling him to move, to fight. But he didn't. Not yet. Then it happened. The taller deputy reached out, gripping Dante's arm. Tight. Too tight. A reflex. A split second. Dante's body tensed, not in resistance, but in instinct. Years of training, muscle memory kicking in. And that was all they needed. Resisting arrest. The words exploded like a gunshot. Before Dante could react, he was shoved forward, his arm twisted behind his back. A sharp pain shot through his shoulder. Hey! H-E-Y. He gritted his teeth, struggling to keep his composure. I'm not resisting, but it didn't matter. The deputies had their excuse, and now they weren't letting go. With practiced ease, they wrenched his other arm behind him, cold metal snapping around his wrists. The sensation of handcuffs, familiar but never like this. Never so wrong. The gas station cashier watched from inside, frozen. A couple of passing drivers slowed, eyes wide, but no one said a word. No one ever did. Should have kept your mouth shut, one deputy sneered, shoving Dante toward the patrol car. Bet you won't be so tough sitting in the back of MY Ride. The door flung open, and before Dante could say another word, he was shoved inside. The door slammed shut behind him. The heat hit him instantly, like a wall. The windows were up, the air conditioner off. And as the officers walked away laughing, cracking open their ice-cold sodas, Dante sat there, sweat already forming on his brow. He exhaled, slow and steady, because what these cops didn't know was that they had just locked a Marine in a cage. And Marines, they don't break. And just like that, the trap was set. But who was really walking into it? Dante or the cops? Because what happens next? Oh, these deputies are about to have the worst day of their careers. But before we continue, what would you have done in Dante's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The door slams shut, the lock clicks, and just like that, the game changes. Dante Carter, former Marine, war-hardened veteran, now sits trapped in the back of a patrol car, his body pressed against the scorching vinyl seat, his wrists cuffed behind him, sweat already forming at his temples, his breathing slow, measured, controlled, because this This is no ordinary arrest. This isn't about justice. This is a message. Outside, the two deputies chuckled to themselves, cracking open cans of soda, leaning against their cruiser like they just finished a hard day's work. One of them glances at the car, smirking. How long you think he lasts? The other shrugs. Few minutes. Maybe more if he's tough. They don't know. They have no idea who they just locked inside. Inside the car, the heat is already unbearable. No AC. No cracked windows. Just a relentless, pounding sun, turning this metal box into a furnace. The air is thick, suffocating. The kind of heat that sticks to your skin, seeps into your lungs, makes your head light. It's designed to break a man. But don't. He's been through worse. Heat like this reminds him of the desert, of missions under the sun where the only thing keeping him alive was his training, his willpower, his mind. And right now, his mind is his greatest weapon. He shifts slightly, scanning the car, feeling out his surroundings. Every inch, every bolt, every latch. The doors, the glass, the cuffs biting into his wrists. His heartbeat steady, focused. Outside, the deputies take their time, joking, checking their phones, acting like they just took down a dangerous criminal instead of an innocent man. The taller one turns back toward the car, tapping the window with a knuckle. How's the heat back there, buddy? Dante doesn't flinch, doesn't move, just stares back, his eyes cold, calculating. The deputy grins. Ain't got much to say now, huh? They laugh. But Dante is counting. Every second, every movement, every weakness. Because what these cops don't realize is that they didn't just lock up an ordinary man. They locked up a soldier. And soldiers don't break. Then, something changes. A radio crackles to life. A voice comes through, static-filled but clear enough to make the deputies pause. Dispatch to all units. Be advised. State officer requesting immediate confirmation on a subject in custody. Name, Dante Carter. The shorter deputy furrows his brow. Why does that name sound familiar? The taller one hesitates, grabs the onboard tablet, types in the name. And when the screen loads, their faces change. The smirks? Gone. The cocky grins? Wiped clean. Because right there, staring back at them, is the record of a man they should have never touched. Dante Carter, former Marine, Special Forces, multiple tours, combat expert. The deputy swallows hard. Oh, crap. Inside the car, Dante sees a shift, sees their shoulders tense, sees the panic creeping in, and for the first time since they put him in cuffs, he smiles. Because now it's his turn. And just like that, the tide shifts. These officers thought they were in control, but they just made a deadly mistake. What happens next? Oh, trust me, you don't want to miss it. But before we continue, how do you think Dante is going to get out of this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Inside that patrol car, the heat was unbearable, enough to break most men. But Dante Carter? He wasn't most men. Sweat dripped from his brow, his muscles burned, but his mind? Sharper than ever. Outside, the two deputies weren't laughing anymore. Their cocky grins had melted faster than ice in the sun. The moment that name flashed across their screen, reality hit them like a freight train. Dante Carter, former Marine, Special Forces, hand-to-hand combat expert, weapons specialist, a man who had spent years fighting enemies far deadlier than two overconfident cops in a dusty small town. The taller deputy swallowed hard, rubbing the back of his neck. We might have a problem. The shorter one's voice cracked. We gotta let him out. Now. But when they turned toward the car, it was already too late. Inside, Dante's mind worked like a machine. Years of training, battlefield survival, instincts that had saved his life more times than he could count. He felt the weak spot in the door, the old hinges, the loose paneling. He twisted his body, shifting his weight, and then, bam! A kick. Bam! Another. The frame groaned. The deputies heard the noise and spun around. What the hell? Crack! The door exploded open, and before they could even process what was happening, Dante was out. The heat wave hit him like a sledgehammer, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. His boots hit the pavement, sweat pouring down his face, muscles surging with power. He was free. The deputies staggered back, reaching for their weapons. Don't move. Dante's eyes locked onto them, steel cold, controlled, dangerous. He didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon. They barely had time to blink before he moved. A blur of precision. 1 step, 2, 3, and then bam! He snatched the taller deputy's gun right out of his hands, twisting his wrist with practiced ease. The man yelped, dropping to his knees. The second officer panicked, fumbling for his baton, but Dante was faster. Always faster. He dodged left, spun, and in one swift motion, a single strike to the wrist. The baton hit the ground. The fight was over before it even started. The two men staggered backward, shaking, breathless. For the first time, they weren't the ones in control. For the first time, they were the ones afraid. Dante didn't raise the gun, didn't need to. He just stared at them, his chest rising and falling, his expression unreadable. "You left me to die in that car," he said, voice low, steady. "You think I'd let that slide?" The taller deputy stammered. "W didn't know, man. We didn't." Dante stepped closer. They flinched. "No, you didn't know. And that's your problem." Then he did something they never expected. He tossed their weapons away. The two officers exchanged a confused glance. "W, what are you?" Then Smeagol, a dangerous, knowing smirk. "You wanted to teach me a lesson? Now it's my turn." And before they could react, before they could even think, Dante grabbed them both and shoved them into the back of their own patrol car. The door slammed. The lock clicked. Now, they were the ones trapped in the heat. The deputies pounded on the windows, panic setting in, the sweat already forming, the heat creeping in. The lesson? Taught. Dante stepped back, hands on his hips, watching them struggle. Then, with a slow exhale, he turned and walked away, the sun beating down on his shoulders. He didn't need revenge. He had already won. And just like that, the tables had turned. The cops thought they were in control, but in the end, they were just another lesson in Dante Carter's book of survival. But we're not done yet. Oh no, because what happens when the sheriff arrives? When the truth comes out, that's when things really get interesting. So what do you think? Did Dante handle this the right way? Would you have done the same? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The sun blazed down, the heat rolling off the pavement in shimmering waves. But inside that patrol car, it was a furnace. Sweat dripped down their faces, their uniforms clinging to their skin, panic setting in. The same two deputies who had laughed just minutes ago were now trapped. Their wrists slick with sweat as they struggled against the locked doors. The air thick, suffocating, the reality sinking in fast. Dante Carter stood outside, arms crossed, watching. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with calm, unshakable authority. He had given them the exact punishment they had planned for him. One of the officers pounded on the window. "Hey, let US out." Dante tilted his head, taking a slow step forward, his voice steady. "Hot in there, huh?" The taller deputy swallowed hard. "Look, man, we made a mistake, okay? Let us out." Dante didn't blink. "A mistake?" He tapped the glass. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks intentional." The shorter deputy shifted in his seat, eyes darting around. "Come on, man. We didn't know who you were." Dante exhaled through his nose. And that's the problem. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. And then a new sound. The distant wail of sirens. The deputy's eyes widened. The sheriff was on his way. Dante didn't flinch. He simply took a step back, folded his arms, and waited. Minutes later, a black SUV screeched to a stop. The sheriff, a grizzled man with a thick mustache, stepped out, his eyes scanning the scene. He looked at Dante, then at the squad car, then back at Dante. A beat of silence. Then, what the hell is going on here? The deputies practically threw themselves against the window. Sheriff, thank God. Get us out. The sheriff narrowed his eyes, walked to the car, looked inside. Then he turned back to Dante. Dante met his gaze. No fear, no anger, just the weight of everything that had just happened. The sheriff's jaw tightened. His gaze flickered to the cuff still on Dante's wrists. He let out a slow, measured breath. Then he pulled out his keys, stepped forward, and unlocked Dante's cuffs himself. Click. The metal fell away. Dante rolled his shoulders, rubbing his wrists, never breaking eye contact. The sheriff turned to the deputies, still locked in their own car. Start talking. The excuses poured out fast. It was just a routine stop. He looked suspicious. We didn't know who he was. The sheriff held up a hand. Enough. He turned back to Dante. You want to press charges? Dante thought for a long moment. He could. He should. But instead, he stepped forward, leaned down, and locked eyes with the deputies. I don't need to press charges, he said, voice low, because your real punishment is living with the fact that the man you tried to break could have broken you, and chose not to. The sheriff exhaled, nodding. Get out of the car, he barked at the deputies. You two are done. Badge. Gun. Now. The officers paled, stammered, but one look at the sheriff's face and they knew there was no coming back from this. One by one, they handed over their weapons, their badges. And just like that, their power was gone. Dante watched, not with satisfaction, not with smugness, just quiet certainty. Justice had been served. He turned, walked to his SUV, and climbed in. As the engine rumbled to life, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The two men who had tried to take everything from him, now standing on the side of the road, powerless. Dente smiagul. Lesson learned. And just like that, justice was delivered, but not with fists, not with vengeance, with wisdom, with restraint, with the kind of strength that comes from knowing you have nothing to prove. The dust settled. The heat still clung to the air. But in that moment, something far heavier weighed down on these two disgraced deputies. Their badges gone. Their guns surrendered. The smug arrogance they once carried, shattered. Dante Carter, the man they tried to break, the man they tried to humiliate, now stood tall, unshaken, unbroken, and in the eyes of every bystander watching, he was the real law here today. The sheriff stood between them, his expression unreadable. He had seen a lot in his years. But today, he saw justice served in a way no courtroom ever could. He turned to Dante. You sure you don't want to press charges? Dante exhaled. No need. He glanced at the two former officers. They already lost everything that mattered. The sheriff nodded slowly. Then we're done here. But the story wasn't over yet. As Dante turned to leave, a small crowd had gathered. People who had seen everything. People who had lived under this town's justice system for years. And now, they saw a man who stood up, who didn't break, who didn't back down. One voice called out, Hey, man, what's your name? Dante paused. Then, with a small smirk, he turned his head slightly. Carter, Don't Carter. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Respect. Admiration. The kind that isn't given, it's earned. And as Dante climbed back into his SUV, as the engine rumbled to life, as he pulled onto the open road, he left behind more than just a lesson for two crooked cops. He left behind a message, a warning. That real strength doesn't come from a badge. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and never letting anyone take that away. And just like that, the story of Dante Carter ends. But the impact, that stays forever. The road stretched ahead, the town shrinking in the rearview mirror. Dante Carter didn't look back. He didn't need to, because his job here was done. But the echoes of his presence, those would remain. In every whispered conversation, in every shaken deputy who would think twice before abusing their power, in every bystander who now knew, fear was not the answer. Strength was. As he drove, his hand steady on the wheel, his mind was clear. This wasn't just about two road cops. This wasn't just about a bad day in a bad town. This was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, who had ever been judged before they had spoken a word. They wanted to break him. They wanted to teach him a lesson. But in the end, he was the one who did the teaching. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't looking for praise. He was just a man who had fought wars, on the battlefield and at home. A man who knew that real power isn't about who holds the gun. It's about who holds their ground. And that's exactly what he did. Somewhere, miles away, two former deputies would wake up the next morning with their badges gone, their reputations destroyed. And they would have to live with the fact that they weren't taken down by a gang or an army or a criminal. They were taken down by one man, a Marine. And in that small town, his name wouldn't be forgotten. Not today. Not ever. And so, the legend of Dante Carter was born, a name that meant something, a name that stood for justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who needed it. But tell me, what would you have done? Would you have handled it like Dante, or would you have taken a different path? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next one, trust me, you won't believe what's coming.